Hi, and welcome to From Many People's Strength, the podcast that covers Saskatchewan politics and current events. My name is Cory Johnston, and my pronouns are he and him.
My name is David Richards, and my pronouns are he and him, or they and them.
And
it's one of those weeks where, and this has been not uncommon, I guess we should expect this in general, but there's been a lot of news from outside the province influencing news that's happening in the province, right? Like it's kind of Saskatchewan news, but in a lot of ways it's a Saskatchewan perspective on broader news. Right? Like that's how you think of it. Or how I kind of think of it. So it's an interesting week to have that sort of perspective on things. So a couple different places we could start, I guess.
There's well, the thing that I really think is on the minds of everybody at the moment is politicians who leave Canada during, well, the rest of us can't even have our families over.
Well, I've talked about, we've both talked about this, the sacrifices. It's so frustrating. It's the different reactions, I think, are also of note. You have Doug Ford out in Ontario, and when Doug Ford was elected, and myself included on this, really saw Ford as Canada's Trump, right? He was the one that was, big, loud, blowhard, and I guess to some extent there's some, body shaming issues that come into that just because he's a larger guy and they physically similar to Trump. But their way of talking is similar. They both try to present themselves as not a politician, in spite of, in Ford's case, having been in politics his entire adult life, or effectively his entire adult life, depending on when you consider him having become an adult.
Maybe still not.
It's fair. It's fair. But in any case, we sort of had this imagery of, Kenny, and Kenny wasn't around yet, but even I guess he was around, just he wasn't officially the premier of Alberta yet. But your Kennys, your Brad Walls, your Scott Moe, your Stephen Harper, all of them are the sort of that old school, sort of more Canadian-esque conservative, small c conservative. And Doug Ford was viewed as sort of this more American style conservative, right? This big, loud, more Republican than conservative, pandered to the social conservatives, sort of would be a bully when it comes to how he does his politics. And then, not that I agree with him, my politics are still very different from Ford's, but this last year has shown him to be, in many ways, one of the most moderate of the conservatives out there, and especially when it comes to the COVID issue. And again,
somehow
it's bizarre that, not wanting people to die is an anti-conservative notion, but he's kind of the one that, of all the sort of big name conservative leaders, has been the most responsible. So when he had a cabinet minister, when his finance minister got caught leaving the country on vacation, when that really violated the spirit of the rules, even if, there can be debate on whether the letter of the rules or not. He's the one who said, nope, you're resigning, you're gone, boom. And now you have sort of these leaders who were supposed to be more suave, more understanding, knew how to play the game better, would be better at governing, even if they weren't as good at campaigning. You have them not, right? Kenny has just been appearing out of his depth when it comes to trying to figure out this COVID stuff. And obviously with the cabinet manager, Alberta is probably the worst of the bunch. But it'll be interesting to see where things go with Saskatchewan. Is Scott Moe going to take the Kenny approach or the Ford approach? And I don't think we know yet. I think they're stalling for time. I think it was Thursday of this last week where it came out. So we have one sort of quote unquote business day since it happened. Politicians typically don't do a lot publicly on weekends. And there was the stat on Friday.
Right.
So like there really hasn't been time for them to do much yet. But Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, he's going to have to do something. Because not doing something is a form of doing something in this circumstance, right?
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Like the
Obviously,
provincial government said he wouldn't be resigning, but they always say so-and-so is not resigning right before they resign, right? Like whenever there's a resignation, there's always the announcement that there isn't a resignation.
There's absolutely no resignation. Yeah. And obviously the
Which is
NDP,
normal, right?
Yeah. Obviously the NDP has to at least say something. They have to be the critics. And they are calling for the resignation, obviously.
Yeah.
So,
well, it'll be interesting to see, like, if any, I don't know of very many politicians from the left, and maybe I'm just not seeing it. Maybe this is that so-called left-wing biased news that they're just not reporting on it. But I'm not hearing a lot of it from the left, where you have like NDP cabinet ministers from provinces with NDP leadership, or like opposition folks where this is happening. And so maybe it's just there's not as much attention to it, but
it's possible. But it's also, I mean, not to be that guy, but it's also likely, in my opinion, that the opposition's non-conservative politicians just aren't going to do that.
Yeah.
Like they're actually following the guidelines on some level.
I had some friends I had a friend from Alberta post a meme. I can't remember if it was a meme or it was her actual words, but it was like, just imagine if Justin Trudeau flew to Hawaii.
Right.
And like, just imagine what this reaction would be, like how much howling there would be from conservatives about it. And it was funny because conservatives showed up on the post to prove the point, because they were going, well, back in March, he drove to his wife's house, or like he drove home and he just crossed the border for work. And like, because there was the provincial border between Ontario and Quebec was closed, except for travel to a place of business for essential workers. His family lived on the Quebec side of the border, like, because Ottawa splits the border, right? Like, those of you people don't live there. Ottawa is essentially half on one in Quebec and half in Ontario. Effectively, Gatineau and Hull are essentially Ottawa. Right. And so like, he drove home and people were saying, well, that breaks the law. And it didn't break the law. And even just from the spirit of the law sense, a half hour, 45 minute or an hour drive to the home where your nuclear family lives, who is in quarantine, and like, prime minister is an essential service, right? Like
one could say.
Yeah, one could say, right? Prime minister is an essential service. You can make jokes, but ultimately we do need someone in charge of the government at all times.
If he's not considered an essential service, then I don't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah,
honestly.
Then we need to really scale back on things that we're considering essential, right?
Yeah.
But what was funny was all of these people, like, someone makes a point and they like rush to prove it true by saying it's exactly the same thing. Trudeau, crossing the border for work and not like living on opposite sides of the Quebec-Ontario border and driving in a car by himself is exactly the same as flying to Hawaii on a plane full of strangers. So I just...
It's often said that nuance is dead. In a situation like this, it seems so apparent, right? Like, these situations are not the same in any way, but
and like, could Trudeau have done some things better from an optics perspective when that came up? Probably. Sure. Right? Like, there are ways of handling that better. I'm not the biggest Trudeau fan. But like, it's ridiculous. And again, I just, for certain, if this was an NDP MLA, the outrage that would be coming from the Conservatives right now, it would be loud enough to hear from Hawaii. So
yeah, that's right. The interesting thing that I've encountered lately is that this seems to be something that a lot of people understand as wrong. Like, it's not just online. It's like passengers in my Uber, people I meet in the store. This is conversations that people are having about the government and
well, and it's getting international attention. Like this isn't just an Alberta story or a Prairie story or a Canada story. Like this is one of those stories where you go into the BBC section, where you go into their BBC's international section. They're talking about it there, and same with other news organizations around the world when they talk about international events. This is making the news in that. So I think Scott Moe is going to have a little bit more scrutiny on how he reacts to it, both to his advantage and disadvantage. Comparing it to Alberta, it's only one person. And I think the disadvantage, sort of all muddled together, but I think he can more easily slip it under the rug because it's just one person. But in some ways, he also has a greater ability to do something about it, because the majority, the Sask Party majority is so strong. There's no major issue if he steps down, even if he steps down as an MLA, and if he just steps down as I think you could probably placate most people if he steps down as a cabinet minister, stays on as an MLA, is a backbencher for 2 years, and then shuffled back into cabinet the next time there's a major cabinet shuffle. Because in a year from now, you can shuffle him back into cabinet and it wouldn't be a big deal.
Nobody's going to remember.
No one will remember that, right? In a year from now. So you can shuffle him out. Whereas in Alberta, you have 8 members of the party, right? Like that's a big deal. Like you can't and they still have a sizable majority there too, but like 8 people in your party being either shuffled out of cabinet postings or being asked to step down as an MLA even, that hits you harder. So I think Scott Moe has that working for him, where either choice, either the shoving it under the rug or the actually doing something about it, he has that advantage. The flip side being, the downside is whichever one he doesn't choose can get targeted, right? Like if he doesn't shuffle it under the rug, he'll have people going, oh, well, it was only one guy. Why are you making such a big deal of it? And if he does, it's either way, he's going to get the backlash effect either. But
that, in a sense, that rolls us into the poll suggesting that the Prairie premiers have a very low satisfactory rating.
Specifically, it was polling on how they are dealing with COVID. So I think you'll still find, for Moe at least, the overall satisfaction rating is probably still pretty high. I haven't seen any recent polls on that, but
he is doing better than the other Prairie premiers. But I think it says here.
His management of COVID is 39% satisfaction.
So that's not an overall approval rating, but it is. But so that's a less than 50% satisfaction rating is still not good.
No, even on a specific issue, and it is interesting because it's such a big issue, right? Like it's Even people who, possibly, especially people who don't think COVID is a big deal, everyone thinks how you are handling COVID is a big deal. Right? No matter, no one can say the COVID-19 crisis of 2020 wasn't an issue. Whether you think COVID is a hoax, you still think the handling of it is a big issue. Right?
Yeah. You might be on the wrong side of that.
Yeah, exactly. So for a premier's, what is essentially going to be the cornerstone of his legacy, of the legacy of his first and second terms to a large extent, for him to be at such a low satisfaction rating has to be troubling for him. But it is interesting that his satisfaction rating on this one issue is at 39%. But I'm the next time there's an overall satisfaction rating survey come out, I'll be interested to contrast the two. Because if he's still up around 55 or 60%, that's interesting as well. That tells us a lot about 60% of people think Mo's doing a good job in general, but only 40% think he's doing a good job on COVID, where that 20% falls, and how can the NDP capitalize on that, right? How can you take, like, again, this is that ruthless thinking, the campaigning thinking, but how can you take that 20% of the population who now there's a wedge into that, solid grip that the Sask Party's had on the province for a decade? How do you use that wedge to pull away some of that support when it comes to, actual elections rather than just polling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see how that goes in the next, I guess we'll probably have a overall poll before too long, but
yeah. And they usually don't get a lot of attention, so sometimes they slip under the radar. It's significant, and like Kenny is just being destroyed on this issue, right? Kenny's at 30%.
He's doing an awful job. So
he's definitely the worst of the bunch. Pallister's at 30. Pallister's at 31. So you have the three conservative, three sort of the strongest conservative majority provinces. The three prairie provinces. The three provinces, to a large extent, probably had the best cards dealt to them as far as managing the disease itself. Now, managing their population base who listens to Trump is challenging.
Right.
I do not envy either one of the three of them when they have to understand that their base consists of a significant portion of their base consists of Trump fans. But from a logistics standpoint, there's no ports. Their major urban centers are isolated.
Yeah.
You don't have the same level of urban sprawl. Like Edmonton does. Edmonton is a sprawling city to some degree, but you don't have that same type of sprawl that you have out in Ontario or Vancouver or around Montreal. You don't have everyone bunched in close proximity like you do in the Maritimes, combined with every city is a port city. So, like, from a logistics standpoint, those three provinces had the easiest time, which again may have been, part of where the backlash is coming from, is that false sense of security. We were supposed to have it easier. We were supposed to have this low population density, making it no big deal here. And so that when things
so why
do
is
go
it a
south,
problem now? Yeah.
Well, and it's a problem because we got, a false sense of security, right? We didn't have to worry about it, quote unquote. And so people didn't. And you have people like cabinet ministers flying to Hawaii.
Yep. And
so,
yeah, in a sense, that we can also touch on Scott Moe's response to being asked if he would change anything in his response to COVID-19.
Yeah.
He seems quite confident that he did as good a job as he could possibly have done.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, and again, this is a different worldview. I don't know a single issue in my existence where that would be my answer. And it's different.
Yeah, no
it's different if you say, like, if you didn't know anything different, if you didn't have the information you have now, would you have done anything different? Well, no, obviously I wouldn't have, because I didn't have that information. I
was in the same boat. So.
If you were in the exact same situation, I had no other information, we're the same well, that's a stupid question. But the question usually gets asked, if you knew then what you know now, would you do anything differently? Like I said, there's almost no issue in my life. There's very few things that I couldn't find at least some tweak on to improve.
Of course.
Right? Like, who thinks that way? Who thinks, no, everything I did was perfect. I could never improve, even with the omniscience of 2020 vision.
Yeah.
That's going to be an awful pun forever now.
No kidding.
But like,
Yeah,
even if you just, and then lean into that. If that's the issue, just lean into that when you give your answer, saying, you know what, there's additional information that's come out now. It would be unfair for me to talk about what I would have done in March, knowing what I know in December, because I didn't know what I know in December back in March. So, that is an unfair question to ask. Now, if what you're asking me is what are some things that I would like to do next time that I didn't do in March, that's a different story. And I'm happy to answer. And you can walk your way around and you can find ways of saying that.
Yeah.
But to say no, like I said, I don't understand that mindset on literally anything.
Not to pin Mo into a corner here, but it's the kind of mentality that I typically see from people who don't learn anything from mistakes. They don't learn anything after the situation has gone on.
Yep.
He doesn't actually know more than he knew then. Like, I'm not saying,
Yeah. I know, even then, just say, you can, again, other ways of weaseling around that question, saying, you know what, I think there's going to be a lot of things that we are going to be able to learn from this, where there's going to be ways of doing things differently if we face a similar health crisis in the future, but it's premature to start talking about them now, because we're going to need to sit down and do an overall recap of everything that has happened. Right now, we're acting to the situation we have today. Once the province is vaccinated, once this pandemic has died down, once we know we are in a position of safety and can convert resources from solving the problem today to analyzing the problem of the last 9 months or last year, then we can look at that information and determine what are ways of doing things differently next time. But if I start making guesses now, that's premature. Like, I think that's a fair answer. I think that's still a bit of a weasel answer, because I think there's concrete things we could say and say, with if we knew then what we knew now, we would know to start doing masking earlier.
Right.
But even if you don't want to say all of those things, even if you don't want to start talking about the lessons we've already learned, you can weasel your way around that answer very easily by talking about how I don't want to be premature on coming to conclusions. So I think it comes down, and I sort of study politics and study the history of politics, but I really think this mentality, and it pre-existed it, but I think it really, really finds its roots in the election, the 2004 election in the U.S. between Kerry and Bush, where I think that was 2004, where Kerry was portrayed as a flip-flopper. I think we've talked about this on the podcast before. Right. I've talked about it, but like this idea that there's nothing worse than a flip-flopper. And I think previously the idea of a flip-flopper in my mind is it's not like a flip-flopper isn't just someone who changes their opinion. It's someone who has one, it's the back and forth, right? It's not just changing your mind, but it's changing your mind and back and forth as is convenient. So it's the masks are good, no they aren't, masks are good, no they aren't. Like actively flipping between the two, as opposed to trying to give a nuanced perspective, or as opposed to, hey, I used to have the following opinion on this social issue. As I've learned more about it, my opinions have grown and changed as I have grown and changed when learning. Like those are not the same thing. But with Kerry, the flip-flopper label didn't just get applied to someone waffling back and forth between two issues or oscillating back and forth between two issues, or 2 points of view on an issue. He got that label for having changed his mind on anything. So anytime he went, in the 80s, my views on abortion are different than they are in 2004. That he got labeled a flip-flopper. My views on climate change have changed. My view, because more information was gained. And I think the same thing, I think the right now has a fear of that because they've portrayed this idea of changing your mind as a negative so hard for so long. It's been a central narrative of the right now for 16 years that changing your mind is a bad thing. They never say it. Learning and growth is a bad thing, but effectively that's what they mean. That Mo can't say it without sort of falling off the narrative if he does. So.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I don't know. Yeah, like you say, we've talked about that before. The idea that you should be able to change your mind if you have learned a lesson or more information comes forward. And I get that people vote for you for a particular reason, right?
Yeah.
Like they think you are this kind of ideology, but I don't think that you always have to switch ideologies to suddenly change your opinion on a certain subject, right? Like,
right. And often people don't, right? Oftentimes this is getting more esoteric, but it is a greater understanding of your own core values that leads you to a change of belief on the implementation side.
Right.
And one of the things I've looked at is how do you overcome the backlash effect? So the backlash effect, I can't remember if we've talked about that, but like anyone listening, backlash effect is that idea that if someone has a deeply held belief, when others come along and present data and evidence to dispute it, it actually causes them to become even more ingrained in that belief. So, I think chocolate is poisonous. Well, someone comes along and says, okay, well, here's some evidence to show chocolate isn't poisonous. I will view that evidence in an exact contradictory way. That evidence that you are showing me actually reinforces my belief that chocolate is poisonous.
And even more so if you identify with that belief system, right?
Yes, right. Yeah. And the way to overcome that, the way to actually defeat the backlash effect is appealing to someone's values first. So you don't try and present data about the specific point. You link it into what's important to someone. So, I understand, the chocolate example probably breaks down on some of this, but when you're talking to someone like, hey, I understand that family is really important to you. Like you, I find, family is really important to me. Here's how I embody that, or loyalty, or patriotism, or you find some core value. And I think in a lot of cases, the politicians who do change their mind on certain issues, those who do it for ruthless or issue or convenience reasons, but those who actually do, I think, have that sort of genuine change of heart, have it because they have certain core values and they understand how the issue aligns with that core value better. So you'd hope that they could bring some of their following along with them on that. So,
but not so much sometimes.
Not so much. Because I think you could make a conservative argument. I think you can make a conservative argument for a lot of the common sense COVID measures. I think there's very easy ways that the conservative movement, whether it be capital C conservatives in Canada or Republicans in the U.S., could have made this their movement. You talk about brainstorming on this. So you come in and you talk about how we don't need government to solve the issue, right? You don't need government to solve these issues, and we as Americans or we as Saskatchewanians can show that we don't need big government telling us what to do, and Saskatchewanians will band together and wear masks and do these things. Right. This is what it means to be a true conservative. Christians look after each other. You can very easily tie it into,
for sure.
Again, even conservative Christian ideology. You can link into these things. So they could have brought people along had they wanted to. We've said the same thing about. It's a weird tangent, but carbon pricing, right? Carbon pricing is the conservative solution to climate change. It is about as conservative a solution to a problem as you can come up with. Yeah. And they could have brought people along what they wished. So, but yeah. Sorry.
No, you're right. It's okay. So I think it's kind of related.
Okay.
I was having conversations with conservatives this week, to a couple, and we got onto the subject of the way that the numbers are being presented by the government.
Yeah.
Particularly after the long weekend, because there was like 550 new cases over the Christmas weekend.
Right.
And the issue was that on Monday, suddenly it was 550 new cases.
Yeah.
Which sounds scary.
Yeah.
But the person I was talking to believed that it was presented in such a way that it was meant to be scary.
Yeah.
And I think it's a similar mentality, right? Like it's that.
Oh yeah, that's backlash effect right there. That's 100% backlash effect. Yeah. Like that's about as quintessential backlash effect as you can get.
Right. The number, and even with the caveat that we know that these numbers are 2 days of numbers or 3 days of numbers, and that you can say, well, 550 over 3 days, that's actually an improvement over our previous numbers. But
it's why we should look at weekly numbers rather than daily
reacted
numbers,
better.
Right? Like weekly numbers are what we need to be going with.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
for sure. Right. Like 100%, we should be looking at weekly numbers, and anytime you're looking at individual day numbers, you always see those graphs that have the bump to them, right? The 7-day cycle built into the graph.
Yeah.
And it's because of different reporting over different days. And usually it's depending on the jurisdiction. I was talking about Kyle Anderson previously. He's the microbiologist professor up in Saskatoon who's been brilliant on the explaining COVID stuff. But he talked about like it's usually the Tuesday, Wednesday numbers that are the spike. It's not usually actually the Monday where you see the spike.
Right.
But he says that wherever you are, you'll see that in the numbers. One day is going to have a spike as the weekend numbers roll into it. And again, that's usually Tuesday, Wednesday. Some places Thursday, some places Tuesday, whatever. But we need to be looking at weekly numbers. But the idea of like, the numbers are scary, so they must be false. I'm like, no, like the numbers are scary because this is scary.
Well, yeah, that's the exact thing. Like it's actually a scary situation. And I also saw like somebody posted on their Facebook a comment or something about, I'm starting to think that these people who are constantly talking about not willing to living their life in fear. They don't want to live in fear. I think that they're the most afraid of all.
Oh yeah.
Like
100%.
Because they're in denial of their fears. So then they end up focusing on this so hard and they overreact the wrong way so much. It's just, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. The idea, and again, this is really prevalent in the prairie provinces in Canada. So, and I'm assuming the people you were talking to were from Saskatchewan.
Yep.
The idea that a conservative premier, really honestly, even a premier of any political affiliation, but especially a conservative politician who is now essentially part of a movement that is more or less aligned themselves with the idea that the COVID reactions have been overreactions.
Right.
But really any politician who is the leader of a jurisdiction, so in this case, the leader of a province, would be artificially presenting the numbers in such a way to make their own jurisdiction, so in this case, to make their own province look worse, is ludicrous. Right? Like, when in the history of politics, I actually can think of one exception. It's off topic, but there's when in the history of politics has a politician intentionally made numbers look worse or present them in a way to make them look worse for themselves? Like the only time people do that is the second last budget before an election. That way the budget immediately, okay, look, we surpassed, right? Yeah. Like sometimes they'll do that sort of like, oh, we're going to budget this way so that we can overcome it, right? Like, falsify the numbers in advance so it looks really good when you essentially under-promise and over-deliver. Which, under promise, over-deliver, that's pretty common in sales strategy.
Oh, yeah.
But this isn't that. This isn't under promise, over deliver. This is just straight up making it look like you've delivered garbage.
Yeah.
Or delivered worse than you could have made the numbers work. Arguably, if you are a conspiracy theorist with any degree of rationality, or if you are a conspiracy theorist who actually has a skeptical, jaded view of politicians, you should be assuming that the politicians are fudging the numbers to make themselves look better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not saying they are. Like, again, I think these numbers come from enough far enough upstream, like far enough away from the political process, that by the time they reach the political process, they are tougher to massage. Not impossible, and there are ways of doing that.
Well, I mean, they could. I guess they don't do it this way, but if they wanted to do it in such a way that would benefit them, actually, what they would do is they would lead with the recoveries every time, right? Like they would say, okay, we had 250 recoveries today. Okay, yes, we also gained, 130 new cases or whatever, but look at these recoveries.
Yeah.
But they don't do that.
No. Well, I think it doesn't. Like, I think at this point, the recoveries are still less than the new cases, right?
Yeah, that's true. So maybe it wouldn't make them look as good as...
the contrast. One of the things, and I talked about this on social media this week, is when it comes to the mortality of a disease, there are two different ways of reporting the mortality rate. And again, I am in no way, shape, or form a statistician. But I'm definitely in no way, shape, or form an epidemiologist. I will soon learn how to say that word out loud. I am no way an epidemiologist. I'm not a microbiologist. This is not my area of expertise. I am not a doctor. But in the reading, from what I've been able to ascertain, I didn't do the research. I looked at other people's research.
Yes.
There's just two sort of ways of measuring mortality rate. There's essentially deaths per infection and deaths per case. I'm blanking on the specific acronym and or term, but typically we have been looking at, I'm just bringing up some numbers here. That's why I'm glancing down, gathering some additional numbers. Typically, we look at per case when it comes to COVID. And my understanding is during an outbreak of something, what we typically look at is per case. And the reason for that is we don't know the total number of people infected. The deaths per case will always be a higher percentage than deaths per infection because the denominator is smaller. Mm-hmm. So, COVID, we think the death per case, different variations, and this will be heavily impacted by testing. This is the number that really does get impacted by testing because the more cases you discover, the lower that number appears, right? But it's around 3%. The death per infection rate probably is closer to 1%. I've seen 1.7. I've seen 0.9. I think a fairly conservative is going to be around about 1% of the people infected will die. About 3% of the cases that we discover or know of will die. And people make a big deal. The COVID denialists, or those who are saying it's no big deal, make a big deal that when the 3% deaths per case gets reported, that, we're inflating this, the actual is closer to 1%, But then, which is, if we wanted to do comparing apples to apples, I would agree with them. But what they then do is when they turn around and compare it to other diseases, they don't remain consistent. So then when they compare it to the flu, or when they compare it to heart disease, or really any other health issue, for the other health issue, they'll use deaths per infection. So they are not comparing like terms. And what's really interesting in the here is how here's how they actually make their own case worse if we actually listen to their argument. And I looked at salmonella as a comparison.
Okay.
I was comparing the idea of, wearing a mask, social distancing, and just generally taking common sense COVID protection methods to licking a raw chicken or, making someone else eat raw chicken, right? Because I don't have to wear a mask. The mortality rate's only this low. Well, then why haven't you been eating raw chicken all these years? Right. So if we do that, let's say we're consistent. We could do deaths per cases. Again, here's where they do it's case fatality rate, infection fatality rate are the terminologies you want to look at if you want to get more information than my incredibly amateur description of what these terms are. But for salmonella, if you do comparison on case fatality rate, it's that 3%. Salmonella is 0.4%. So if you're comparing case fatality rate, which is what the scientists typically have been doing, you're dealing with it's 8 times more deadly than salmonella. So not wearing a mask, 8 times deadlier than eating raw chicken. Gross simplification.
So what you're saying is go eat raw chicken.
Go eat raw chicken. Don't let the government tell you what to do. But still wear masks and don't slap other people with raw chickens because they don't deserve to get the disease from you. Yep. But if you use the infection fatality rate, which they all jump to, it's way lower, so this is the one we should be using. As soon as you start comparing it to other diseases, it drops way more. So salmonella, the infection fatality rate is 0.032% as opposed to the 0.4%. So it is more than there is a more than 10 times discrepancy. So
wow.
With COVID, it's about a third. With salmonella, it's less than 1/10. So you're dealing with a 30 times deadlier disease than salmonella if you look at the statistics that the denialists want to use. And that holds true when you look at most things, right? The case fatality rate and infection fatality rate for the influenza, the flu, also has that giant disparity that is a way bigger disparity than COVID because we're not on the lookout for it. The number of people who get the flu and don't get medical treatment for it is a significant portion of the people who get the flu.
Right.
It is, again, you're dealing with a factor close to 10 times, similar to salmonella. Same with so many of these other things. I've sort of gotten a little bogged down in the weeds with going into this. But it's just so frustrating because again, these numbers are making your case better than it actually is, and you're still complaining about the numbers.
Yeah.
And like I said, for anyone listening, recommending, even just looking at the difference between case fatality rate and infection fatality rate, if you want to have a better understanding of what these numbers mean when you are looking at them. Because again, I'm some mook on the internet talking about stuff and I don't have the background knowledge, but I have enough knowledge to point you in the right direction for where to look. And again, it speaks to why these numbers really are already skewed in favor of the denialists. And as soon as you take even even a slightly more different perspective or use these statistics in a slightly different way, they actually tell a worse story.
Right.
So, yeah, sorry.
That's good.
I'm geeking out about statistics and numbers because this is where I can actually bring some of my other knowledge to bear, because I don't know. I hated biology in high school, but statistics and economics and mathematics and all of that's where I can.
You can actually work with that.
I can understand this is now back into a frame of reference that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I'm just listen to the majority of experts guy.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where I am. I know that when you say that, people will often say, but what about the expert I found that disagrees with the majority that you seem to have found? And that's my, I have to say that that's where you listen to the consensus. You listen to the majority. You don't just listen to the one guy who said, yeah, I found the truth and these guys are all liars. You listen to, go to your doctor. Honestly, like if you go to your doctor, he's going to tell you the truth 99% of the time. So,
and there have been, this is where I hate the term devil's advocate. I won't be one. But where I can, because I'm not just pretending to have this view. I guess that's where I have some empathy for it, and where I can recognize the perspective. There have been cases in history, rare, where the scientific consensus was slow to catch up with an individual. It's happened. Like they eventually do catch up. So the scientific consensus and I don't say almost, I think throughout history, the scientific consensus has consistently caught up with that once that was shown to be true. But I think like and it is tough for a layperson to understand who's right in those cases. Leaded gas is always my go-to example. I think the smoking one people kind of know about, and the history of the scientific consensus being smoking wasn't harmful, and then there were a few outliers, and but that one's a lot muddier. Harm caused by leaded gas is probably the one that is the most cut and dry, where you have that one guy everyone thought was a crackpot shouting from the rooftops, leaded gas is killing people and is causing is a global health crisis. Everyone thought he was a crackpot for a decade, and finally people listened to him, and it turned out he was right. That story is always that one that's in the back of my mind on, okay, we shouldn't be completely discounting the voices in the wilderness, but peer review exists for a reason. I think that process, I have more faith in that process than I do in any individual. I think the rigor of that idea, I think, is important. And the people that we typically hear raising the alarm bells, who are getting called experts, typically aren't going through that process. Like they may have expertise. Oftentimes they have expertise in unrelated areas too, which is always a bit of a red flag. Yeah, absolutely. Right. They have a PhD. But they have a PhD in computer science. And I'm the first one to say, I would like to think of myself as a fairly smart guy when it comes to finance, economics, that sort of thing. I'm even when you start getting into statistic stuff, I don't have a PhD, but I have a fair bit of experience. I like to think of myself as a relatively smart guy in my area of expertise. But when it comes to areas outside my expertise, I'll always say, I didn't, again, I said this, I didn't do the research. I looked at someone else's research and tried to get an understanding of it, not actually the expert. But these people who are like, he has a PhD in computer science. He's a scientific doctor. He's a scientist. But that doesn't make him a microbiologist. That doesn't make him
that's right.
An epidemiologist. So who is this guy? And more importantly, let's say you do have the computer scientist who made the breakthrough, who discovered something that no one has discovered before because he had a different way of looking at things, discovered new information that was ignored by the consensus because he had a fresh eyes or different perspective. Again, is he submitting that to the process? Is he submitting himself to peer review? Is he going through the rigor of the scientific method of reproducibility and all of that? So I think that's one of the things you need to look at as well, as opposed to just we got to listen to the experts. So like you say, and there are ways around, there are people who can perpetually keep their, say they're testing a drug, they perpetually keep it in clinical studies, and they charge patients thousands of dollars per dose.
instead of ever submitting it for peer review.
Yep.
And those people can still develop a following, and they can still develop an online presence that says, this is an expert who disagrees with the way that we're treating cancer or whatever.
Yeah.
But usually I find that if the expert is saying something like, this is a way that you can, I'm more inclined to listen to an outlier expert if they are saying, here's a thing that I'm saying that will protect you or will make the world a better place. But then somebody who's like, no, don't worry about it. We can just go out and do whatever we want and live our lives.
Yeah. To be fair, I'm countering you on this again. That would be the argument. That would be the anti-vaxxer argument, though, too, right?
Yes.
The anti-vaxxer arguments. They are the ones saying, no, we're shouting the alarm bells that this is a thing that's dangerous. Yeah. And just like people told you smoking wasn't dangerous, and just like people told you leaded gas isn't dangerous, they're now telling you vaccines aren't dangerous. There are flaws in that argument. So again, I am not I am bordering on devil's advocacy here. I'm not saying their argument is valid, but I'm saying I have an empathy for that skepticism, because we don't have the world does not have the greatest track record of listening to people saying things are dangerous. So that it is sort of where my one concession to anti-vaxxers comes in, where I can have empathy for them. I struggle to have empathy because, again, they cause so much harm, so much death, so much misery in the world through their bullshit. And again,
because in a sense, the anti-vaxxers, while they're saying, yes, these vaccines, we're the ones calling they claim that they are the ones calling the danger out.
Yeah.
But in fact, what they're doing is the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? What they're doing is saying, no, don't take this protective vaccine.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
Well, and every decision is that way, though, right? Every decision has dangers on both sides.
Yeah.
The anti-maskers are saying, well, the real danger, the real danger is the threat to our liberties, and it's all these people who say, no, don't worry about it. This isn't a risk.
Yeah.
So every argument has people who are going to downplay the risks opposing them, upplay the risks of. Anyway, so it's.
Yeah. I think while we do tend to compare anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers, and they do seem to be largely the same group, I think that there is a difference in the boogeyman per se, right? Like, like the boogeyman for an anti-masker has to be an amorphous ideal of like our liberties, control,
and the state,
where rather than like a disease that we know kills people. So, so, or like, I mean, it's a slightly different boogeyman, I guess. But
no, I definitely can respect sort of that difference. I definitely see the difference there as well. It just comes down to one of those things where I think it's important to be careful with this idea that we just always believe experts.
Oh yeah.
I think defaulting to believing an expert makes sense, and we do that. We default to trust in 99.9% of the things we do every day, right?
Yeah,
like I sit down to have a glass. I'm drinking a glass of water. I trust the experts that this is safe to drink, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not, and even if I at some point did research into the water treatment facilities of the city and the filter that I use on my water, I don't test it every single time because I trust that nothing has changed. Like we live in a state of trust fairly frequently.
Well, yeah, that's right.
But I think I still think it's important to not completely fall into that. I just think defaulting to it is fine. Just understanding when someone raises alarm bells, it is important to look at those alarm bells, but then evaluate them, right? If someone walked in and said, hey, Your water, if someone walks in and said, hey, your water's poisonous, I need to pay attention to them. And then I also need to pay attention to, is this the city saying sand got into the water supply and I probably shouldn't drink, water for 24 hours? Or is this some guy knocking on my door saying, oh, city water's unsafe to drink. Let me show you why you should buy my super reverse osmosis miracle water dewaterifier for $19.99 a month for the next 7 years, right? Like it's who is selling you the story.
Yeah. Yep, that's right.
Which may be undermining our points too, as well. I think again
that's part of the difficulty of the situation, right? That unless you're literally the person doing the work, you don't know. You have to find somebody that you can trust.
Yeah.
Whether it's on, one side or the other side of a subject, and hopefully enough people follow the right side, that ends up being so that nobody gets hurt or less people get hurt or sick or whatever,
Yeah.
The world is complicated.
I was going to say, should we switch to a different depressing topic?
Sure. Yeah. We've been going for about 50 minutes already. So we'll switch to something for about, 10 minutes.
Last little bit. I was angry. I'm not angry that he did, but I'm angry that he had to, with Shaq Evans apologizing for his tweet.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like
that's the, okay. So he encountered racism from Saskatchewan people on online comment sections, and then tweeted that, I'll just even read it here. Had to come back real quick after I hear what Sask fans had to say about BLM and boycotts. Wow, super disappointing, as I had a lot of love for Sask. Not anymore. Always wanted to play there. Now I'm not so sure. There's nothing wrong with that tweet.
Not a thing. There is literally zero things wrong with that tweet.
So, yeah, that's
again, the date of that tweet, August 28th, 2020, at the height of the summer's, slightly past the height, but essentially at the height of the BLM protests over the summer. Yeah. And that tweet becomes even less problematic. That tweet becomes even more okay when you look at the tweets and the comments that he was talking about.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like we can't, like, I don't even want to talk about the types of things that were on some of the media in this province. In response. And you know what? You can try and spin that of, oh, they're the minority, they're not, blah, blah. And you have so many people who, when they hear things like that, respond with, oh, not all Saskatchewanians.
Yeah.
But take that same energy that you're putting into insisting that it's not all Saskatchewanians and put it into proving that, put it into showing that, put it into talking about how this is unacceptable a way to talk. If every single person who says, oh, not everyone in Saskatchewan is like that, put the same amount of energy they put into saying not everyone in Saskatchewan is like that, and put that energy into actually calling out the racism, actually standing up when they see it, actually intentionally going online and saying, you know what? I am a Saskatchewan born and bred, lived here 57 years. I voted Conservative or Sask Party in every single election. Yes, I am white. Yes, I am a farmer. And what you are saying is garbage. It is bullshit. Shut the F up. You do not represent this province. If every single person who said not all Saskatchewanians did that, Shaq Evans wouldn't have had to tweet what he tweeted. And he wouldn't have tweeted what he tweeted.
Exactly. Instead, those comments and tweets get retweeted, liked. They get more support than you would expect from a province where it's a minority of people with those opinions.
Yeah.
And maybe it is a minority of people. Maybe it's just the loudest, worst people are online and they're all commenting on articles and tweeting badly. But I challenge any good I challenge any critical thinking person who is anti-racism or anti-racist to read the things that people say from Saskatchewan about race online and not feel some level of shame.
I've said this a few times online. I've made a point of saying it. The rule, don't read the comments, because that's a pretty solid internet rule that people talk about. The whole don't read the comments, right? Because it'll just get you angry, just get you upset. It's not worth the emotional investiture. That rule applies to a story that is about you or a demographic you are a part of. If you are a woman, you know what? Don't inflict reading those comments upon yourself if you choose not to. Yeah. If you are queer, don't read comments. Don't go to the comment section on a news story about 2S LGBTQ plus issues, right? And I still do. Like if it's an issue on queerness, if it's an issue on other ways in which I am not in the majority, I'll still go take a look. Anti-Semitism issues, I'll go take a look. I'll still look because I want to know what's out there. I want to get an understanding. But sometimes I do take a break. Sometimes I do take a break from the comments. But where that doesn't apply is when you're in the majority. If you are white, you should be reading the comments on race and understanding what's being said. If you're a man, go read the comment section when a woman in STEM does something amazing. Yeah. It's awful. Yeah, it will cause you some trauma. And don't put yourself into the psych ward reading this stuff. Don't depress yourself to a point of inaction. But if you're still thinking things are no big deal, don't read the comments. Doesn't apply to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So. I mean, obviously I'm white, cis, straight dude. I go to these comment sections and it would be super easy for me to ignore them or even read them and just, not say anything. But and I'm not patting myself on the back, but I think it is a responsibility for those of us like myself to go to these comment sections to some degree and argue against these people and point out that like you said, you have to say, no, you're wrong. Yeah. You do not represent my province. You do not represent my country. You are not the people who I agree with on this.
Yeah. And there's lines to be drawn, and you could have an argument about where to engage and where to not, what's just giving their arguments more credit and what isn't. But at the very least, understanding it's out there is important. And I said, if all of these people, stood up and, told the racists that they don't actually tell the racists, not all Saskatchewanians think that, as opposed to telling the people who are being attacked, oh no, that's not all of us. We wouldn't have had to have Shaq Evans come up with his recent tweet where he says, and I know everyone in Sask isn't like that. And sort of goes on from there and talks about how I really do love Regina and him having to apologize. And that is so wrong.
Yeah.
No,
he should never have had to apologize. He did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
When I read this thread, I believe I was on Reddit, and somebody commented, this is the organization, the Rough Riders, that also apologized to cattle farmers when the riders appeared in a ad for A&W's Beyond Meat Burger or vegan burger, because it was viewed as so the Rough Riders are overly apologetic to the worst aspects of our community. They don't have to be. They shouldn't be. They should. But I guess, I don't know. Maybe it's like everything else. It's money. They're worried about, where their bread is buttered. So,
yeah. I don't know. Some of that stuff just feels from a marketing perspective, backwards looking. And maybe the gamble is you appeal to who you can appeal to today and worry about tomorrow. You know, if you start to be viewed as the racist football team, you know, you can turn that around in 5-10 years once it starts being an issue.
Yeah.
But it breaks my heart that he had to apologize. Like there's very little more to say, so we can move on to another topic on it, other than this is garbage, absolute total garbage. And I don't know if he had to, quote unquote, had to apologize because the riders told him he had to, or
That's
if
true.
he had to apologize from no one told me I had to, but I understood, you know, from a marketing or dollars in my pocket sense that I had to. Like, I don't know where that comes from.
I'm not sure.
But he's apologized. Apparently he apologized. This is the second time he's had to apologize for it. And he talked about how it was an honest mistake. I'm like, no, it wasn't a mistake. And I'm sorry anyone is telling you that it was.
I find it's very unlikely he's ever going to watch this or see this. But if he ever does, I hope that he knows that we know he did nothing wrong. I might even title this episode, Shaq Evans Did Nothing Wrong.
Skipped a 50-minute mark or wherever it was we started talking about it. Do we want to try talking about pipelines or leave that till next week?
We can leave that till next week. I just want to touch on this one article about Saskatchewan vaccination distribution spreading to other areas. Just an article saying that we're doing vaccinations all around the province, and we are getting the Moderna vaccine in January. Looks like tomorrow, possibly. So, it's good.
Good news.
It's nice to end it on a high note, I guess.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Let's stick to that then. Thank you. Go off to the rest of my evening less angry.
Thinking about how good it is that we're vaccinating.
Miracles of modern technology.
Yeah, it really is.
Right? Like this is pretty incredible because diseases like this have come along many, many times in history, and they normally don't get stopped.
Yeah.
Right? Like the whole just let it run its course. We've had to just let it run its course. We weren't as interconnected as a species as we are now, so it typically just wiped out chunks of individual populations rather than spreading globally. But where diseases have hit, they've hit hard, and we've had instances in human history where there have been huge swaths of the population wiped out, and we're not going to have that as long as we keep our. I guess we already have to some degree, but literally we could have been dealing with 10, 20 times more deaths than we've already had, and as long as people aren't stupid, we're going to have this literal miracle of modern technology step in and help keep us all safe, which is pretty remarkable. Yep. So pretty thankful for that.
Yeah, ditto. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Now just patient and crossing my fingers till I'm allowed to get it.
Yep.
So let me know how it goes. You get it. You should get it before me, but
well, we'll see. Yeah. See how much power Uber has as a company. All right. So you can find us on podcast apps at anchor.fm/FromManyPeoples. You can find us on Twitter at skpoliticspod. Our Facebook is facebook.com/FromManyPeoplesStrengthPod. Or you can email us at FromManyPeoples@gmail.com. Thank you once again, David, for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Cory. Sorry once again for going off on a couple tangents tonight, but I appreciate you're always having patience with me as I go off on a crazy rant. So,
I appreciate the rants because I have a few built up in my mind too. So,
all right, have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
You too.